morning, good afternoon, good evening. What I've got on the screen there is a photo of a classroom in session. That's being shown the students in a classroom. And the academic year in Zimbabwe ends in December. That means these pupils have spent the whole year in this classroom. This is their desk, this is their benches. One is going to ask themselves, so what have they learned? What could they possibly learn in such an environment? How could this possibly be happening in the 21st century? We often complain of Africa lagging behind. Isn't this dragging ourselves backwards? These children have absolutely no chance of really competing in the 21st century. That much is clear. They have no chance. Ian Smith, the former Prime Minister of Rhodesia before the country gained its independence, famously boasted that if blacks ruled themselves, they will be walking on raw sewage and think it normal. I think that reality has come to haunt us as a people. It's our reaction to that statement that has made it all come true. Instead of asking ourselves, could this be true? And if it is, what can we do about it? The instinctive reaction by some was either to ignore it or to react violently to it, accusing Smith of being a racist. Unfortunately for the people of Zimbabwe, this is a truth that has come to haunt us because we have done a lot worse. We have not only walked on raw sewage, we have raw sewage flowing into our main water supplies, contaminating the water, and we've been drinking it. That is the cold reality, the tragic reality. Bad governance in Zimbabwe is the root cause of our problem. We have failed to govern ourselves. And it is deliberate too. Poverty in Zimbabwe is a result of deliberate policy by the ZANU-PF regime. In the 70s, the economist John Robertson, the late John Robertson, he was an economist and a banker, well renowned in Zimbabwe. He told Ian Smith that if you gave the rural blacks title deeds to the land, even if it be 1 acre or 2 acres, nothing fancy, they will build for themselves a decent home. Because when you've got title deeds to the land, you know whatever you invest on it, you can recover. You build a decent house, you can leave it to your children and your grandchildren. Even if you decide you want to move from there, you can sell that house with the acre of land and recover something from it. But if you do not own that acre of land on which your house stands, the headman can tell you you must move from there, and you have no choice but to move. If you're going to sell that house, you can only sell the house itself. The land on it will be allocated to somebody else. Who would want to buy a house where a meter from the house, you are told, is somebody else's land? No one. It made economic sense. Even the banks will have the confidence of giving such an individual a loan to build a decent home. But Ian Smith rejected the proposal. The reasoning behind it was straightforward. If you give the blacks any economic empowerment, the next thing they would be asking for is political empowerment. And in Rhodesia, the blacks had no vote. And Ian Smith wanted to keep it that way. Interestingly enough, John Robertson gave the same proposal to the incoming ZANU-PF government after independence. Robert Mugabe and his cronies rejected that proposal for exactly the same political reason. He did not want to empower the blacks economically because he wanted to control them politically. Here is Margaret Dongo, a former freedom fighter herself, and the ZANU-PF MP, and later on she became an independent MP, talking to that very topic. ZANU-PF denying meaningful economic empowerment for the sake of their own selfish political gain.
They have wrong priorities, especially the current government. How can you go and build an airport which services a few people, and the majority are the elite and the so-called investors? Look at the rural. I made you come to interview me because I wanted you to have the experience of the roads that we are using. If we go today to our hospital there, you feel pity with that's a hospital in a rural area. If we go to our clinic, you feel pity. We have no piped water here. Do you know the reason why the rural people vote for ZANU-PF? One, they're intimidated. Two, the policy is that the rural people should remain poor. and subservient to the government. They should remain poor, because if they remain poor, they continue singing the song for their master. This is why these people have been impoverished. It's for a reason. Because at the moment, if you economic empower these people, they'll go out of hand. ZANU-PF will never have control over them.
That is true. I think the tragedy here is that millions of Zimbabweans out there know what is happening here. That the millions of people, particularly in the rural areas, are being kept deliberately poor for political reasons. Unfortunately, this obsession to control people has now started to drift even into the urban centers as well. We have seen a number of occasions where ZANU-PF has been harassing urban dwellers. Before independence, as a Black person, you could go into the urban centers and you could buy the house and be given title deeds, ownership to that house and the piece of land on which it stands. Most of the people, the only thing they could afford is what I call the matchbox houses, the 4-roomed houses in the high density suburbs. But at least they owned it. And since independence, many people have been buying stands in the urban centers because that's where they at least have the title deeds, away from the rural areas. But even there, the regime has started to drift in. You may think you have been given the title deeds to the land. The next thing is the council or the regime itself comes around and say, oh, the land was allocated inappropriately. And many people who had built decent houses have seen those houses demolished. ZANU-PF is exerting its control, controls the rural areas, now wants to do the same thing in the urban centers. We can pretend that we are independent, but the truth of the matter is we are not. And in our case, we have to be honest with ourselves. As long as millions of Zimbabweans out there are denied the opportunity to have a foothold on the economic ladder and continue to be treated like serfs in the medieval times, Zimbabwe will never be truly independent. I would like the people of Zimbabwe out there to seriously think, what kind of citizen would these young children make? When they get to adulthood? They have learned nothing. This is the end of the academic year. And who knows? Next year, they'll be expected to go into the next class, next level. If this was grade 1, they'll go to grade 2. If this was grade 2, they go to grade 3. And yet they've learned nothing. And this has become the norm in Zimbabwe, where it's quantity. The regime is obsessed about quantity. It's failing to provide a decent education system, but it still wants to maintain that they are going to school. They've learned nothing. What kind of citizens would these people make? We complain that the rural people are the ones voting for ZANU-PF. What choice do they have? I go back to what Smith said again. If the blacks are to rule themselves, they'll be walking on raw sewage and think it normal. If you can look at what is happening in Zimbabwe, how hundreds of thousands of potential citizens are being denied fundamental tool to enable them to function in the 21st century, education. And you look at what is happening there and you say nothing about it, then you too are walking on Western raw sewage and think nothing of it. Zimbabwe will never, ever recover economically, politically, and socially as long as we have a situation where we can look at some of these blatant abuse of power and think it normal. These people, if their parents were given title deeds to 1 or 2 acres of land on which the homestead is built, I can tell you that they can improve themselves, provide better accommodation for their children. They will be able to contribute to building better schools for their own children. But ZANU-PF does not want them to do that. It is deliberately keeping them poor and beholden to the regime. That's why they are denying them title deeds. These people don't want a handout. They want the opportunity to do something for themselves. But the regime does not want that. The regime wants to come, as many people will remember during this beginning of the rainy season, go to the rural areas and give their parents, the parents of these kids, 10 kgs of fertilizer, 5 kgs of maize seed, handouts. That way, they are always beholden to the party. And this is the consequence of that policy. A new generation of ill-educated individuals are coming in. This is 45 years after independence, and we still are failing to provide a decent education for our children. Not because their parents are lazy, but because their parents have never been given an opportunity to better themselves. And those in the urban centers Don't think yourself lucky, because what is happening in the rural areas is now happening in the urban centers. How many of you in the urban centers are sitting in the dark day in, day out because of power shortages? How many of you are driving in potholes in the urban centers? The other day there was a photo, a photo of a young lady standing in the middle of a puddle in Kakuvi Street, the heart of Harare. 45 years of gross mismanagement, rampant corruption have reduced urban centers into sorry states, potholes everywhere. Even big hospitals like Parenyatwa Hospital, Pilo Hospital, they're running out of drugs. That is the reality. Zimbabwe has got the potential to become the South Korea of Africa, as somebody predicted in the early 80s. We are a failed state because we have failed to govern ourselves. And that does not only, it's not limited to the leaders themselves, but to us citizens too. We know what ZANU-PF is doing. And yet, we have allowed it to happen and walked past things like this and think it normal. 45 years. This is not normal.